backgrounds and expertise. So with that, one of the things we want to do is give you a structural representation so you can see that. Tom, if you'd put that slide up on the screen. And Tom, I think we're comfortable just sharing this out, maybe emailing it out at some point. But this gives us an overall structural overview of how we're managing these games. And at the top, you can see we have the state of Utah, which is the host. We have the USOPC. We have the International Olympic Committee, and we have the International Paralympic Committee. So obviously, that is those entities help oversee and provide guidance for the games. Underneath that, we have then the OCOG board, which has been formed. We have 25 voting members, as we alluded to during that announcement. And as part of that, we have 6 members who are members of the executive committee who have delegated authorities that can make decisions in between board meetings and kind of a fast-acting opportunity. Now you'll see off to the right the Games Steering Committee, which is about 32 non-voting advisory members. That's the number that we think we'll arrive at. We're not quite at 32 yet today. And that steering committee is focused on, it's an advisory committee, it's a non-voting committee, and it will meet every quarter with us, with the board together. So we'll have a joint steering committee and board meeting for about an hour. And our first one is tomorrow at 9 a.m. Virtually, and the media is welcome to attend. That's an open meeting. And at the end of the steering committee meeting, we'll excuse the steering committee and go into a closed board meeting to conduct the confidential business of the games. The steering committee, we're really excited to get that broad input and direction and engagement. For example, and each of our steering committee members will serve on what you'll see below there are subcommittees. And so we'll have subcommittees. You see on the left the traditional ones: finance, audit, ethics, nominating and governance, people and compensation, etc. But then we have some other committees that are important to making sure we're well attuned and well connected to people from Utah. For example, we have a host communities committee. And I'm pleased to announce that Mayor Mendenhall, who's been a huge stalwart with us ever since the beginning of this journey, will be chair of that committee, as well as being a member of the steering committee. And Mayor Worrell from Park City will be vice chair of that committee. We know how important Park City is to the delivery of our games, with 3 very important venues, and I would argue more because Utah Olympic Park has several venues within it. And that being a very important venue, we've asked Mayor Worrell to be vice chair of that very important committee. We will have representation. Now, let me back up a little bit. So Mayor Mendenhall and Mayor Worrell will both be on the steering committee, but then we'll have many members of that committee who will not be on the steering committee, but still have the opportunity to participate through that subcommittee. For example, we'll have Mayor Kaufusi from Provo and Jenny Wilson from Salt Lake County. So we'll have broad representation from those host communities, and they will meet as a committee, funnel their information to the chair and vice chair, who will then represent that committee on the steering committee. So you see we have there an athletes commission, which will be chaired by Catherine Rainey Norman, and she'll be on the steering committee as well. We're thrilled to have her continue to be involved in many ways, as we talked about during our board announcement. We also have technology and innovation committee, and I'm pleased to announce that Matthew Prince will be chairing that committee. We're excited to have him. Technology is one of the big 3 in my in my book for delivering a games between venues, transportation, and technology. That's the heartbeat of a games. And so Matthew will be helping with that and leading that effort. And then sport and venues, Colin Hilton will be leading that committee as chair. Colin obviously will be continues to be a valuable member of our team. And as part of that, for example, sport, we're going to have the CEOs of each of the national governing bodies in the US participate in that. So you can see our reach. In sport, we want to get everybody engaged and participating and feel part of the games. And we need their feedback. And this is a great communication vehicle to do that. So that committee, which has the sport representation and also the venue operators, will have Colin as a representative on the steering committee to communicate bilaterally opportunities that we have to maximize the impact of the games. And finally, I'll note one of the committee's athletes' families. We're excited to have Lindsey Vaughn chair that committee. She'll be fantastic. As we know, she got this whole thing started, and we think that's going to be a differentiator from Utah. I will point out one more. Arts and culture will be led by Steve Price. Steve, as you know, is on our board. So here we've got a little bit of a mixture of board members as well as steering committee members who are leading these, just like Lindsey Vaughn is a member of our board. But we have great leaders of these committees. They're not all selected yet. That will come over time. They're not all filled out yet. That will come over time. And one of the things that we would like to communicate with this, even though we're off and running, is to be patient with us. This is a 9-year road. And so we want to get some things underway, but we also want to be patient. We want to be listening. We want to be prudent. We want to be thoughtful. And so we'll have a slow, careful ramp, very prudent, to be able to engage people, ramp the organizing committee over time in a very responsible way. So we're all super excited about the steering committee, its work that it's going to do, the leaders that we have involved. And I'd like to pause now and talk and have us joined by, first of all, Mayor Mendenhall, who is leading perhaps the most important committee out of the whole group. And so she's serving, she actually has 3 roles. She is an honorary chair of the board. She is a member of she's a member of the steering committee, and she's chair of the host communities committee. So in amongst all her duties, we've imposed on her to do even more. So Mayor Mendenhall, if you're on, I'd like to have a few words from you.
Yeah, Fraser, I don't think we have her on here right now. So if you want to go to Brad, and he can make his comments next.
Okay. Do we not have is Mayor Worrell on?
No.
Okay. So with that, we're just thrilled to have all of those people in place. And now I'll turn it to Brad.
Thanks, Fraser. It's really great to be with all of you today. Appreciate your time and attention to this. You know, it's been super interesting in the wake of the announcement about 2 weeks ago. We've just seen tremendous enthusiasm from people across the state wanting to lean in and help us prepare to host the world in 2034. And we're really excited to engage them. And the steering committee that Fraser just described is going to be, as he said, a really useful vehicle for us to get broad engagement from people all over the state of Utah. And I'm excited. If you look at that list, you see a remarkable collection of individuals with knowledge and perspectives and experience that are going to support the organizing committee's operations, the staff that I work with here, and everyone as we get ready for 2034. We have started to take the initial steps to establish a small, lean, talented core staff. We will have them up and running March 1st. We're getting things going in that regard. You know, Fraser talked about this, but maybe to use Winter Olympics parlance a little bit. 2034 is the equivalent. You hear sometimes this phrase, it's a marathon, not a sprint. I'd say this is a 20-kilometer biathlon, not a 500-meter short track speed skating event. We've got a long time between now and 2034, and we will be ramping up these steering committees, the subcommittees in the steering committee slowly over the course of the next couple of years, and making very deliberate and careful decisions as we do that. So those are my comments, Tom, really relative to the steering committee that Fraser announced. If it's okay, I want to pivot to one other item that's come up that's a little different than the steering committee. Is that okay, Tom, if I do that?
Yeah, what I'd like to do, Brad, let's go and take questions on the steering committee first, and then we'll circle back so we get the steering committee up front on that.
Oh, great idea. Okay.
So do we have any questions from the media for either Fraser or Brad relative to the steering committee and announcements today?
I'll jump in. Hi, Lisa Roche from Deseret News. Brad and or Fraser, I'm just wondering, does the steering committee have a leadership position, and who's going to fill that? Is there like a chairman or vice chairman, et cetera? And do they meet ever independently of the organizing committee board, or are they only meeting quarterly with the board? Thank you.
Yeah, great questions. Yeah, the chair of the steering committee will be the same, or the leadership of the steering committee will be the same as the leadership of the board, where I will be chair, Brad Wilson and Steve Starks will be vice chairs of that committee. And then second of all, the intent is that a lot of the work is going to happen in these subcommittees. And so they'll be meeting in between, and to Brad's point, some of these are going to be started next year or down the road. We've got this long runway and we want to be judicious about it. And so they will be formed over time and populated over time, and they'll be constantly being updated. But they'll be meeting and providing their input and direction via their chair and vice chair to the steering committee, which will then meet just on a quarterly basis with the board.
So sorry. So it's just the chair and vice chair that meet on a quarterly basis?
No, the entire steering committee will be there.
Okay, but they do not meet independent of the board.
No, well, this is their meeting combined with the board. That will happen every quarter, and that's where we'll get the reports from the subcommittees and also communicate to them what they need to hear from the management team, from Brad. And we'll see a good example of this tomorrow a little bit, in that basically tomorrow you're going to see an onboarding exercise where we're going to explain the purpose of this. This will be the first meeting of the steering committee. We're welcoming them. And anyway, I think that answers your question.
I would just add, Lisa, that this is a collective effort between our governing board and the steering committee, and you're going to see them collaborating with each other on different committees. And this is just the venue where we're going to bring them all together and work on different issues and educate them and the public on what's happening. But in many ways, you won't see any differentiation between the two groups in terms of that steering committee work.
I'm just wondering, the public would be able to listen in when the steering committee is meeting with the board, or perhaps join a public meeting, but otherwise not. So there'd only be 4 times a year that the public would have access to what the board is doing.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
The steering committee will only be meeting 4 times a year. So.
Okay, thank you, Lisa. Well, we'll go to Julie Jag next.
Thanks for taking my my question. I actually want to first build off of that. So my understanding is that then these subcommittees, they'll report to different people, or they'll have people that are people who are on the steering committee will participate in these subcommittees, and then they'll come back and report. Is that correct?
Correct. The chair, and if there's a vice chair of each subcommittee, is on the steering committee. And so that's their communication vehicle from the subcommittee up to the steering committee for those joint meetings.
Okay. That helps. So then the other question that I have is with the elected leaders that are in the steering committee and on these other committees, will their roles change as their roles in government change? So if you are one of them, if Nan or Mayor Mendenhall step down as mayor, or if one of our legislatures take the different role, how does that change within the committees?
Yeah, these are really ex officio positions relative to their responsibilities as elected officials. And as much as we'd like to keep our elected officials around forever, we know they move on from time to time. And so we'll adapt.
Sorry, and then one other question is just, I'm a little curious as to how you decided on who would participate, particularly in the Olympians, because I know there are a lot of Olympians that have wanted to be part of this process. The ones that you picked have been part of the process, I feel like, for a while. But yeah, how did you come about them? It's a big group to kind of whittle down to these 10.
Well, to be clear, the Athletes Commission is much broader than this. So remember that these are just people on the steering committee, but the Athletes Commission could have 40, 50 athletes because we want broad participation. So you'll see a lot of other names who will be on the Athletes Commission. And over time, we'll announce the members of the different committees as they get formed, put together, start meeting. You'll see more information. The 10 that are on the steering committee just have a good cross-section: Olympics, Paralympics, experienced athletes, newer athletes. Nathan Chen, of course, we had to have Nathan in there because he's the Utah story, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And I find it pretty interesting that we have Nathan, who's the reigning gold Olympic champion, and we have Sarah Hughes on the board, who was from 2002. So we've got a good broad cross section of athletes.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julie. Any other questions from the group? Okay, none heard. Brad, I'd like to go back to you. I know you have a few comments, unrelated comments you want to add. Go ahead, Brad.
Yeah, thanks. Well, some of you have asked some questions about Senate Bill 333, which is a piece of legislation that is being run by Senator Stevenson. And we just want to be clear that we're really thrilled that the state of Utah is the center of an increasing number of sporting events across the country and really the world. And they are very valuable to what we do here. And they're helpful as we lead into the 2034 Winter Olympics. This particular bill is not a bill that we have been involved in or consulted with. It's around supporting infrastructure for sporting events, not necessarily the Olympics. And we've made a commitment, and we're sticking to it, that we're not going to use taxpayer dollars to run the day-to-day operations of 2034. And, we wish Senator Stevenson success in the bill he's running, but it's really not tied to us or our efforts. Every one of our venues is already in place, and it's part of the reason why we were awarded the games last July. So that's I wanted to clarify that and our involvement, or lack of involvement, actually, in that piece of legislation. And you're going to see, I'm sure, over the course of the next 9 years, other legislation that comes up that supports Utah becoming an increasingly important hub for sport, whether it's summer sports or winter sports. But that doesn't mean that the organizing committee is driving that legislation.
Thank you, Brad. Do we have any final questions from the group?
Sure. Brad, if we could follow up on that, because, of course we need to. I understand that you didn't request this, you're not asking for it, and you're continuing to commit to no tax dollars. But as I understand it, what the bill does is allow for tax increment financing in areas around venues. And so existing venues, perhaps like the Maverick Center and others might leverage their hosting of Olympic events into creating these tax increment financing tools to enhance infrastructure, build out housing and other things. So it seems like the Olympics could be a catalyst to some things, even though it's not the organizing committee per se. Do I understand that right? And what's your position on that being used as that kind of catalyst?
Well, I believe that's my understanding as well, Lisa. And that's a policy decision for lawmakers to make. I mean, we do want to make sure that as we prepare for 2034, that we shape Utah in a way that's helpful for Utahns. Whether that's the right vehicle or there are other vehicles in addition to that or instead of that that are going to help us, do that as a state. I think that's an interesting question. My understanding is that legislation is not just tied to venues for Winter Olympics, but tied to sporting venues for summer events, for events that don't have anything to do with the Olympics. And so we'll see what policymakers do as they start to move that through the rest of the legislative session.
You have a position one way or the other on
We don't.
that?
We're neutral on that legislation, and we'll watch it. We haven't been I've had no discussions about the language of that legislation, nor has anyone on my team. It's been completely run outside the scope of the organizing committee.
Okay, because they did apparently talk about it yesterday in terms of the Olympics, so they've connected it to the.
Yeah, they may have. I don't know what that looks like or what their thinking is. But I'll just reiterate something I said earlier. I mean, we are ready for the games. Our venues are already in place, and they're being used every day by youth and athletes that are training. And so if there's other infrastructure that the state wants to see as the state grows and develops, and it has a nexus to sporting events, whether they're summer sports or winter sports, I think that's a separate policy discussion.
I wouldn't ask you to speak on behalf of the Senate ever, so.
I learned in my last life to never do that, and I'm not going to do it now. So
Understandable.
Thank you, Lisa. Any other final questions?
I do, yeah. As long as we're talking about bills, I also was wondering if I could bring up House Bill 541, which also, in its title anyway, has a tie to the Olympics. That's the one where it has to do with liability at sporting venues, specifically, it sounds like ski resorts. Is that something that the Olympic Committee has asked for, or kind of where is that coming from? It seems like that's already in place, so I'm curious.
Yeah, our understanding of that, Julie, is it's just amending an existing section of statute. I was with Fraser yesterday when we heard about it and saw it for the first time. Again, you've seen a history in this state of the legislature doing things to try to manage different liabilities for businesses, and I would just put this under that same umbrella. This is not an Olympic-driven piece of legislation.
Does it impact the liability insurance that the games need, however?
I would say it's unlikely. And Fraser can maybe speak more to that as the former COO of 2002, but I don't think it would have much of an impact.
Yeah, not much. It could have a marginal impact when we go get our insurance, that there are limits in liability, but we'll have that insurance in place regardless.
Okay, and again, just not one that you guys have endorsed or really talked to anybody about. Is that correct?
100% correct. Yeah.
Any final questions before we wrap it up? Hey, thank you very much. You should all have the link information for the steering committee meeting at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. There will be a final board briefing tomorrow at 11:30. You should have that link. If you don't, reach out to me, Brad and Fraser. Thank you very much. And thanks to the media for joining us here today for this announcement.
Thanks for your time.